purpose. Today's subject will basically be about anxiety, understanding it, and coping with it. I would like to start off by saying that anxiety comes in many different forms: social anxiety, and then you have basic anxiety, anxiety when it comes to family, and then general anxiety, where just things in general make you anxious for no reason at all. You can develop it or you can be born with it. Either way, it's still really, really hard to deal with. Um, how does anxiety affect the body and the mind? Basically, as far as affecting the mind goes, when you have severe anxiety, you lose a decent portion of your rationality skills. You begin to see things, and you begin to see things in a different light. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense to other people because it just simply doesn't make sense at all. You create scenarios that don't exist or probably would not exist. The probability of them are very low, but the fact that there is a probability, it triggers you in a way, and you feel really anxious about it. Like it's an extreme possibility when in reality it's not. How does it affect the body? When you have anxiety, you could experience chest pain. You can experience rapid heartbeat, loss of the ability to breathe, such as hyperventilation. All of these rolled up into one. You usually come down with like what I like to call an anxiety attack or a panic attack, which both of which do have their differences, but are relatively the same in a lot of ways. Basically, can be triggered by being overwhelmed by different stimulants of anxiety at one time. How do you cope with anxiety? I call it like the filtering system. You just filter probability through your head. You think of a situation and you try to separate yourself from it, and you think to yourself, well, how possible is this really? And a lot of the times you'll find that it's not exactly as possible as you probably originally thought it would. Another way of coping with anxiety is understanding it, doing research on anxiety, like the different ways that it affects your brain and your body and how it occurs and why it occurs. Um, I found that medication for anxiety doesn't often work, but the medication that I personally would recommend is hydroxyzine. It's an emergency medication if you start to have an attack. You take it, and then about 15 to 30 minutes later, it basically starts to calm you down and even your breathing. It works in many different ways. It's an anti-anxiety, an antidepressant, antipsychotic, etc., etc. If you're experiencing anxiety, another really, really good way to handle it is to reach out to somebody and let them know what you're anxious about, because then they could possibly explain to you why it isn't possible or why it's not probable. Uh, Another huge way of dealing with anxiety is understanding yourself, understanding your own mind, what triggers you to have anxiety, and how you personally feel that you would best cope with anxiety. Sometimes it's small spaces, large spaces, quiet rooms, music, loud rooms, being isolated, or being in a large group of people. Anxiety, I feel like a lot of times is misrepresented and extremely misunderstood. Uh, People will when they think of anxiety, a lot of people who don't understand it, they think of like being stressed. Anxiety is so much different than stress. It's a lot more severe. When you have anxiety, you are freaking out. You've officially lost a good portion of rationality, and it isn't your fault. It comes a lot with overthinking and lack of understanding. While stress, on the other hand, is caused more primarily by things that actually do exist in your everyday life that you're stressed out about. Anxiety, more often than not, is like out of this world, thoughts and feelings. I remember in particular one thing I used to have really bad anxiety about is people watching me when I walked. I used to have nightmares like where I'd be walking down the hallway and people would be watching me, and I would just lose all like motor functions. Like I would just drop to the floor. I couldn't walk. Like I couldn't crawl. Nothing. And those dreams kind of worsened it for me. Like I'd be walking in the hallway and I'd be like super conscious of the way I was walking, which didn't make any sense. I'm just walking down the hallway, and not a lot of people are paying attention to me or the way that I'm walking. I don't even really understand why it gave me anxiety, and It's probably why I haven't completely gotten over, that particular thing that gives me anxiety, but I did like learn to understand it and to understand that it's not exactly very realistic. Um, Anxiety is it's not treated like as big of a deal as it is. Like people will say things like, "Oh, you're using your anxiety as an excuse," or your anxiety isn't that bad, or it's all in your head, blah 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 blah. And people saying things like that to you does make it worse, because to you, you feel like now you're overreacting. People don't understand like this is something that's abnormal, and it makes you feel isolated. And upon feeling isolated, it makes you feel abnormal, which those are the two things that I found add to anxiety the most. Feeling misunderstood or abnormal because of it. But it is fairly normal, and it's fairly common. It comes in different forms. You can have minor, major, or severe anxiety, and the best advice that I can give you is try to understand yourself. Try to understand your anxiety. Try to understand where it stems from, how rational these thoughts are, how probable these thoughts are. And even if it is really, really probable, sometimes you just have to think to yourself, well, it could happen to anybody, and stressing out about it necessarily won't help you. When you're like that, another one of the best ways to handle it is think to yourself, is there anything I can do about it? If the answer is yes, then you have nothing to worry about. There's something you can do about it. If the answer is no, then there's nothing to worry about. There's nothing you can do about it. The only time you should ever worry about it is if you're not sure if there's anything you can do about it. And that's when you should do like a lot of self-searching and figure out, what you think would be the best way to handle it, or if there's any way to handle it at all, because sometimes things are just out of your control, which is another form of anxiety. Feeling like you don't have control over things can cause anxiety. And when it comes to that, my best advice is to just keep in mind you can't control everything. And trying to control everything will ruin major parts of your life. It'll ruin relationships with friends and family, relationships with significant others, because over controlling people are not typically people that are well liked, for obvious reasons. Um, and this is basically just an intro to anxiety. I'll do more videos later going more into depth about it. But if you like the video, like it, subscribe, and if you have any comments or questions, leave it in the comment section below. And see you guys next time.